Everyone believed the billionaire's daughter was blind. For years, no one questioned it, not the doctors, not the staff, not even her own father. She lived in silence, disconnected from the world, hidden away in a mansion full of secrets. But everything changed the day a new maid was hired. She wasn't a doctor or a specialist, but what she noticed during her normal work would unravel years of lies, challenge a powerful family's past, and bring light to a truth that had been buried since the day the little girl was born. What started as a job turned into a mission, one that would unveil a truth that shocked the entire world, especially the man who thought he had done everything to protect his only child. Before we continue, subscribe to our channel if you're new here. Hit the like button, and let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Someone near you might be watching too. The chandelier lights flickered across the $120-million Anderson estate when the girl everyone believed was blind, turned her head and followed the glow. For 7 years, Alexander Anderson, Silicon Valley's Golden King, had lived with one truth carved into his heart: his only daughter was born without sight. He'd built empires, poured millions into research, bought hope from every doctor who promised it. But in his glass palace above Beverly Hills, all the money in the world could not give her light. Or so he thought. Behind those walls of marble and glass, Serafina Anderson sat in her pink, sunlit bedroom. She was supposed to live in shadows, never knowing the world beyond sound and touch. Yet her smile was too bright, her instincts too sharp, her presence too alive for someone locked in darkness. Every night, Alexander told himself the same thing: if only I'd been in the delivery room. If only I could have saved her mother, maybe I could have saved her sight too. Guilt chained him as tightly as the diagnosis. The mansion bustled with chefs, drivers, and maids, but everyone obeyed the unspoken rule: never question her eyes. And so the richest man in Los Angeles carried a wound money could never heal, raising a daughter the world pitied, never realizing the secret that would soon rip his empire apart. The front gates of the Anderson estate groaned open, and with them walked the one person who would shatter a billion-dollar lie. Her name was Nia Carter, 24, fresh from Ohio, clutching a worn suitcase and a resume that didn't belong in a mansion like this. She wasn't born into wealth. She didn't summer in the Hamptons or brunch on Rodeo Drive. She worked shifts at Starbucks, studied nursing at night, and fought to crawl out of student debt. This job wasn't just work. It was survival. But the Anderson mansion wasn't a home. It was a fortress. 10 servants, 3 chefs, chauffeurs, private security, and yet every face wore the same expression: polite, distant, careful. As if they weren't staff at all, but actors in a script written by someone else. When the head housekeeper, Mrs. Collins, led Nia upstairs, she whispered a warning that felt less like advice and more like a law. Do your duties, smile when spoken to, and never, under any circumstance, bring up Miss Serafina's eyes. Nia blinked. Her eyes? She didn't ask questions, not yet. Then the door opened, and there she was. Serafina Anderson. 7 years old. Chestnut hair tumbling over her shoulders. Sitting cross-legged on the bed in a pink room that looked more like a castle tower than a child's bedroom. Her head tilted as if she was listening to the air itself, her small hands tracing the edge of a stuffed bear worn from love. "Hi," Nia said softly. The little girl turned toward her instantly, too instantly. Her smile was radiant. "You sound nice." It was the kind of moment most people would shrug off. But Nia felt a prickle crawl up her spine. The girl hadn't even heard her footsteps. She hadn't even spoken before Serafina turned. For the next hour, Nia read her stories, described the colors of sunsets, laughed with her until the room felt warm. Unlike the other staff, she didn't treat Serafina like porcelain, she treated her like a child who deserved joy. And Serafina soaked it up like sunlight through glass. But when Nia left that night, she couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her. The girl who was supposed to be blind, had looked directly at her. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon, the kind of quiet day when Beverly Hills sunlight poured like gold through the glass walls of the mansion. Nia carried a tray of cookies upstairs, humming softly. The kind of sound you make when you know the child waiting for you has never even seen the chocolate chips baked inside. She pushed the bedroom door open just an inch. "Guess who brought cookies?" she whispered playfully. Before she even crossed the threshold, Serafina turned her head. Not toward the smell. Not toward the sound. Toward her. Nia froze. "Emily," she caught herself. "Serafina, how did you know I was here?" The little girl giggled, swinging her feet over the bed. "I just know things," she said, voice innocent as sugar. Nia laughed it off. "Instinct, maybe. Kids are sharp." But the unease stayed. 2 days later, another moment. Nia left her phone on the dresser, the screen glowing with a red balloon emoji and a text from her sister. Serafina tilted her head toward it. "That balloon is pretty," she whispered. Nia's stomach dropped. It kept happening. One morning, a toy car lay in the hallway. Serafina skipped right over it, never touching it. That evening, Nia wore a new necklace, a small silver heart. Serafina reached out her hand, brushing the pendant with a smile. "Pretty," she said. Every second stacked like bricks in Nia's chest. The girl the world believed was blind, wasn't just noticing things. She was seeing them. Nia tried to ignore it. She told herself she was imagining things. But late that night, when she carried laundry past the room, she caught a glimpse through the crack in the door. Serafina was sitting by the window. Not facing the sound of the wind. Not tracing the glass with her hands. She was staring out at the city lights below. And for the first time, Nia felt her throat tighten with fear. The little girl wasn't blind. And someone in this mansion had been lying for years. By the end of her first week, Nia had learned something unspoken about the Anderson mansion. Silence wasn't just expected, it was enforced. The staff moved like shadows, efficient but muted, as though every word carried a price. Meals appeared without chatter, chores were done without laughter, and in 7 days, Nia realized she hadn't once heard anyone mention Serafina's eyes. One evening, as she cleared dishes from the dining room, the head housekeeper, Mrs. Collins, stopped her. A woman with sharp eyes and tighter lips, she pressed a manicured finger against the stack of plates and leaned in. "Rule number 1 here, dear," she whispered, voice like cold steel. "Never question the doctors. Never question Mr. Anderson. And never, ever, bring up Miss Serafina's condition." Her stare lingered until Nia nodded. Then Mrs. Collins walked away as if nothing had been said. Nia's chest burned. That wasn't a warning. It was a threat. That night, she sat on the edge of Serafina's bed, brushing the girl's hair while reading Charlotte's Web. Halfway through, she stopped. "Can I ask you something, sweetheart?" Nia said carefully. Serafina tilted her head, smiling. "Of course. What do you know about your doctors?" The smile faded. For the first time since Nia had met her, Serafina's hands fidgeted in her lap. "Daddy says I'm special," she whispered. "But we don't talk about my eyes." Her voice cracked on the last word. Later, as Nia walked back to her room, her mind swirled. Why would a child sound afraid of her own eyes? She passed by the study, the door ajar, light spilling onto the hallway carpet. Inside, she glimpsed Alexander Anderson on the phone, pacing furiously. "Yes, Martin," he growled. "I'll transfer the funds in the morning. Just, don't let anyone else handle her case. You're the only one I trust." Dr. Martin Reynolds. The family's physician. The man who had delivered the devastating diagnosis 7 years ago. Nia froze outside the door, the house suddenly colder, heavier. Behind her, the mansion creaked in the night, the kind of sound that reminded her she was living in a place where secrets weren't just hidden, they were protected. And she had just stepped too close to one. The mansion was silent, the kind of silence that made every creak in the floorboards sound like a scream. It was past midnight when Nia slipped out of her room, a small flashlight hidden in her pocket. Her heart thundered against her ribs as she padded down the marble hallway. This wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was survival. She had to know the truth. Serafina's bedroom door gave the softest groan as Nia pushed it open. The little girl was curled on her side, teddy bear tucked under her chin, chest rising and falling in gentle rhythm. Nia stood frozen for a long moment. What if she was wrong? What if Serafina truly was blind, and this test was nothing more than a betrayal of trust? Her fingers trembled as she pulled the flashlight from her pocket. With a deep breath, she flicked it on, a thin white beam slicing through the darkness. She lifted it slowly, inch by inch, until the light rested across Serafina's closed eyelids. The reaction was instant. Her lashes fluttered. Her brows pinched. She blinked, directly into the light. Nia's breath caught. The flashlight slipped in her sweaty grip. No. No, this can't be. She leaned closer. Serafina stirred, eyes flicking open. For the first time, Nia saw them, wide, clear, reflecting the glow of the light. Not the cloudy gray of blindness. Not the vacant stare of darkness. They were alive. Serafina gasped softly, caught like a child stealing cookies from the jar. Emily, Nia whispered, then corrected herself. Serafina, you can see this, can't you? The little girl's lower lip trembled. Tears pooled in her eyes. Please don't tell Daddy, she whispered, voice breaking. Nia froze. The words were daggers. Why, sweetheart, she asked, her throat dry. Serafina clutched her teddy bear tighter. Because Dr. Reynolds said Daddy will stop loving me if he finds out. The air left Nia's lungs in one sharp exhale. Dr. Reynolds. The family doctor. The man who had diagnosed her. The man Alexander Anderson trusted with his entire fortune, and his only child. Nia stared at the little girl, her mind spinning. Serafina Anderson wasn't blind. She had never been blind. And the lie had been crafted by the one man the billionaire trusted most. By morning, Nia couldn't unsee it. The way Serafina blinked against the light. The way her eyes tracked shadows. The way fear silenced her when Dr. Reynolds' name was spoken. The lie was bigger than a child's whisper. It was carved into this mansion like stone. And Nia needed proof. That evening, while the staff cleaned up from dinner, she slipped into Alexander Anderson's study, a cathedral of mahogany shelves, leather chairs, and walls lined with framed Forbes covers. On his desk sat rows of neatly bound folders, medical reports stacked like bricks in a wall of despair. Each one stamped with the same signature, Dr. Martin Reynolds. Nia's fingers trembled as she opened the earliest file. Her eyes darted across the page, initial diagnosis, total congenital blindness. No retinal activity. But something was wrong. The hospital letterhead looked faded, the ink uneven, as if scanned and reprinted too many times. And buried at the bottom of the page, in a font smaller than the rest, a note, original copy unavailable. She opened another folder. This time, she found billing statements. Endless invoices for specialist treatments in Switzerland, experimental injections in Boston, surgeries that required private jets. Each one siphoning hundreds of thousands of dollars. Millions. Nia's chest tightened. This wasn't just bad medicine. This was theft. The sound of footsteps jolted her. She shoved the papers back into the folder and pressed against the shelf as Mrs. Collins passed the doorway, heels clicking like hammers. When the footsteps faded, Nia exhaled and yanked open one more file, an ultrasound photo, yellowed with age. A handwritten note in the corner read, "Healthy. Vision intact." Her hands shook so hard the paper nearly tore. Emily Anderson, no, Serafina, had been born with perfect eyesight. Every file after that, every diagnosis, every chart, every treatment had been falsified. And they all carried the same name at the bottom. Dr. Martin Reynolds. Nia's stomach churned. She wasn't looking at a mistake. She was staring at a con. A scheme so cruel it weaponized a father's grief. Reynolds hadn't just lied. He had built a prison of false hope, chaining Alexander Anderson with fake science and bleeding him of millions. But the question that clawed at Nia's throat was darker. Why? Why keep a little girl in the shadows? Why convince the richest man in Los Angeles that his only child would never see the world? As Nia shut the file, the answer felt like poison rising in her chest. It wasn't about medicine. It wasn't about care. It was about control. By the time Nia slipped back into her room, her pulse hadn't slowed. The files burned in her memory, forged diagnoses, fake invoices, a stolen childhood. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, asking the same question over and over. Why would a doctor do this? The answer came faster than she wanted. Dr. Martin Reynolds wasn't just the Andersons' family physician. He had been Alexander's friend for nearly 2 decades, a polished man in expensive suits who knew how to smile for the cameras. But beneath that charm was a man who'd gambled everything, and lost. 7 years ago, he'd poured millions into one of Alexander's tech ventures, expecting a guaranteed return. Instead, the company folded. Alexander survived. Reynolds didn't. The billionaire refused to bail him out. And that was the day a friendship curdled into hate. Reynolds found his revenge in the cruelest place imaginable, the delivery room. With Alexander too stricken by his wife's sudden death to question anything, Reynolds slid into his grief with a diagnosis sharp as a knife. "I'm so sorry, Alex. Your daughter is blind. Permanently." It was a lie that cost nothing to tell, but it bought him everything. If you're new, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Someone close to you might be watching too. Only subscribers get the full story. Don't be left behind. From that moment, every move was calculated. He prescribed experimental treatments that didn't exist. He recommended specialists overseas, pocketing the travel funds. He billed for surgeries that were never performed. And Alexander, blinded by guilt, signed every check. But the money wasn't the only prize. By keeping Serafina helpless, Reynolds made himself indispensable. He convinced Alexander to give him partial control over certain trust funds for Serafina's long-term care. Funds that Reynolds quietly siphoned until his own losses were recovered, and then some. It wasn't just fraud. It was control. A way to own the richest man in Los Angeles by convincing him he'd already lost everything. Nia pressed her hands against her face, bile rising in her throat. This wasn't just a medical lie. It was a crime, a billion-dollar con played out in plain sight. But another thought chilled her deeper than the rest. If Reynolds had built his empire on this secret, what would he do to protect it? The storm rolled over Los Angeles like a warning. Thunder cracked against the hills, and rain hammered the glass walls of the Anderson estate. Nia stood outside Alexander Anderson's study, clutching the flashlight in her sweaty palm. Her pulse thudded in her ears. She had rehearsed this moment 100 times in her head, but now, standing at the door of one of the most powerful men in America, the words felt impossible. Still, she couldn't stay silent. Not after what she'd seen. She knocked once. "Come in," Alexander's voice barked. The billionaire was pacing, suit jacket tossed over a chair, tie loosened. He looked older than the man who graced Forbes covers, shadows under his eyes, shoulders heavy with years of guilt. "What is it?" he asked, barely looking at her. Nia's throat tightened. "Mr. Anderson, it's about Serafina." His head snapped up. Instantly, the air in the room thickened. "What about her?" Nia swallowed. "She's not blind." For a moment, silence. Then Alexander laughed, a bitter, hollow sound that carried no joy. You think I haven't spent millions on tests? Do you know how many specialists I've flown in? My daughter is blind, Miss Carter. That's the one thing in my life I know for certain. Nia's hand trembled as she lifted the flashlight. Without a word, she clicked it on and shined it gently toward the doorway. Then watch her, she whispered. She opened the study door wider, and there was Serafina in the hall, barefoot, teddy bear in hand. The beam of light cut across her face, and she squinted. Instinctively. Clearly. Alexander's world stopped. The man who built half of Silicon Valley staggered backward like a soldier taking a bullet. Serafina, his voice cracked. You saw that. The little girl's lip trembled. She clutched the bear tighter. I'm sorry, Daddy, she whispered. Dr. Reynolds told me, if you knew, you'd stop loving me. Alexander's breath caught. His hand flew to his chest as though the words had physically struck him. Who told you that? He demanded, his voice breaking. Dar. Reynolds, she whispered again. Alexander's knees buckled into his chair. For years, he'd trusted the man. For years, he'd written checks, signed papers, believed every word. And all this time. The rain outside drowned the silence that followed, thunder rumbling like the collapse of a kingdom. Finally, Alexander raised his head, eyes burning with something Nia had never seen in him before. Not grief. Not guilt. Rage. Get me everything you found, he said, voice low, steady, and dangerous. If Martin Reynolds thinks he can play me for a fool, he has no idea what's coming. The storm broke by dawn. Clouds drifted away, and sunlight poured over Beverly Hills like a promise. For the first time in 7 years, Alexander Anderson didn't wake with the weight of grief pressing on his chest. Instead, he found himself standing at the doorway of his daughter's room, unable to look away. Serafina was at the window, barefoot, her small hands pressed against the glass. The city stretched below them, towers glittering, cars weaving through the streets, the sky painted in shades of blue and gold. And she was staring. Wide-eyed. Awestruck. Drinking in the world like she'd been thirsty her whole life. Daddy, her voice trembled, soft as a prayer. The sky, it's blue. The billionaire who'd stared down senators, outwitted rivals, and built an empire with nothing but his mind and ambition, broke. His knees buckled, tears spilling freely as he pressed a hand to his face. For 7 years, he had whispered apologies to a child who wasn't broken at all. For 7 years, he had believed the lie. And now, she saw him. He stumbled forward, gathering her into his arms, burying his face in her hair. I'm so sorry, baby girl, he choked out. I'm so sorry I let them steal this from us. Serafina held him tighter, her little body trembling against his. You didn't, she whispered. You never gave up on me. Behind them, Nia stood quietly in the doorway, her heart swelling. She had come here for a paycheck, nothing more. But now, she had given this family something money could never buy back, truth. And in that truth, there was healing. But redemption was only the beginning. Because while Alexander held his daughter for the first time in the light, across Los Angeles, Dr. Martin Reynolds was already making phone calls, covering tracks, shifting accounts, tightening the noose around anyone who dared expose him. The war for justice hadn't even begun. By noon, the Anderson estate was no longer a home. It was a fortress preparing for battle. Alexander Anderson had called his lawyers, secured his accountants, and ordered every financial record Reynolds ever touched pulled from storage. For the first time in years, he wasn't broken. He was dangerous. But across town, in a glass office overlooking downtown Los Angeles, Dr. Martin Reynolds leaned back in his chair, phone pressed to his ear, his smile calm, predatory. Of course they know, he muttered to someone on the other end. But they can't prove anything. Not without me. And believe me, they won't live long enough to try. He ended the call, poured himself a glass of scotch, and stared out at the skyline. He had built his entire safety net on Alexander's grief. If that net was cut, he would lose everything. And Reynolds wasn't a man who lost twice. Back in Beverly Hills, Nia walked down the marble hallway, clutching a tray, when she noticed it, a plain white envelope, slipped under her bedroom door. Her stomach twisted as she bent to pick it up. Inside was a single note, written in block letters. Keep quiet. Or else. No signature. No name. Just a threat. Her hands shook as she rushed to Alexander's study. He knows, she whispered, voice cracking. Reynolds knows I found the files. Alexander's jaw tightened, fury flashing in his eyes. Then he's already desperate, he said. And desperate men make mistakes. But that night, as Nia tucked Serafina into bed, the girl whispered something that made her blood run cold. Dr. Reynolds called me today. Nia's breath stopped. What did he say, sweetheart? Serafina's voice was barely audible. He said, if you keep asking questions, bad things will happen to you. For the first time since arriving at the mansion, Nia wasn't just afraid of the lie. She was afraid for her life. And in that fear, one truth rang louder than all the rest. Dr. Martin Reynolds wasn't finished. He was just getting started. The Anderson estate hadn't known fear in years. But now, it lingered in every hallway like smoke. Security cameras blinked red across the mansion, guards paced the perimeter, and Alexander's legal team filled his study with thick binders of evidence. But for Nia, none of it erased the envelope, the warning, or the sound of Serafina's trembling voice. Reynolds knew. And Reynolds was watching. The first strike came the next morning. As Alexander's chauffeur backed the black Cadillac Escalade down the driveway, the brakes failed. The car skidded into the gates with a sickening crunch. The driver escaped with a broken arm, but the message was clear. That afternoon, one of the servers swore she saw a man in a gray suit across the street, watching the mansion through binoculars. By the time security reached the gate, he was gone. And that evening, Serafina's favorite teddy bear, the one she never slept without, vanished from her room. Hours later, it reappeared on her pillow with a note tucked into its seam. Stop digging. Nia's nerves shredded. She pulled Alexander aside. This isn't just intimidation anymore, she said. He's inside. Someone here is working for him. Alexander's jaw tightened. Then we cut the rod out. No more secrets. For the first time, he didn't sound broken. He sounded like the man who had built empires, crushed competitors, and bent Silicon Valley to his will. Tomorrow, he said, we go public. But Reynolds wasn't waiting for tomorrow. That night, as Nia walked past the kitchen, her phone buzzed. A blocked number. Against every instinct, she answered. His voice slid through the line, smooth, controlled. Miss Carter. You don't know the game you've stepped into. Nia froze, pulse thundering. Stay away from this family. Reynolds chuckled. Oh, I don't want them harmed. I just want them quiet. Especially you. Because if you keep talking, the next accident won't be a fender bender. The line went dead. Nia staggered back, gripping the counter. The billionaire's daughter wasn't the only one living in the dark anymore. Because now, the hunter knew her name. And he was closing in. By sunrise, Alexander Anderson had made his decision. The billionaire who once hid behind walls of glass now stood in front of a microphone, his jaw tight, his voice low but steady. At a press conference in downtown Los Angeles, cameras flashed like lightning as reporters packed into the room. Every news outlet from CNN to the Los Angeles Times had a seat. This is not easy for me to say, Alexander began, gripping the podium. For 7 years, I believed my daughter was blind. For 7 years, I trusted a man who stole not only millions, but her childhood. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Dr. Martin Reynolds, he continued, his voice like steel, falsified medical records, manipulated my grief, and convinced me my daughter could never see. He is a fraud, a criminal, and I will see him behind bars. The room erupted. Reporters shouted questions. Mr. Anderson, do you have proof? Why stay silent for so long? What happens to Dr. Reynolds now? Alexander raised a hand, silencing the chaos. I have proof, he said. And I won't stop until every parent in America knows what he did. By noon, headlines blazed across the country. The blind billionaire hoax. Doctor stole millions from tech mogul. Silicon Valley scandal, child's vision at center of billion-dollar fraud. Cable news ran 24-hour cycles. Talk shows speculated. Hashtags trended worldwide, #Anderson hoax. And through it all, Nia watched from the mansion, clutching Serafina's hand as the little girl asked in a trembling voice, "Am I in trouble, Miss Nia?" Nia shook her head, pulling her close. "No, sweetheart. You're the bravest girl I've ever met." But while America gawked, Reynolds wasn't hiding. That afternoon, he sat in a penthouse hotel room downtown, television flickering with Alexander's press conference. His reflection stared back from the glass, lips curling into a smile. "Let them talk," he muttered, sipping his drink. "The louder he yells, the harder he'll fall when I pull the rug." He tapped his phone, opening a folder of encrypted files. Inside were documents, photographs, and recordings, evidence that could twist the story, smear Anderson's name, and turn public opinion upside down. Reynolds wasn't just fighting for survival. He was preparing for war. By the next morning, the headlines had changed. The night before, Alexander Anderson's press conference had dominated every network. By sunrise, new stories crawled across the ticker, stories that told a different tale. Anderson's lies. Source claims billionaire covered up daughter's condition. Doctor or scapegoat? Shocking allegations against tech mogul. $8.7 billion man accused of exploiting blindness hoax for sympathy. Nia's stomach dropped as she watched the television in the staff lounge. "They're twisting it," she whispered. And they were. Reynolds had moved fast. Overnight, anonymous documents leaked to the press, doctored photos, falsified reports, recordings edited to sound like Alexander himself had orchestrated the hoax to gain sympathy for stock deals and tax breaks. One clip in particular played on every channel, a distorted recording of Alexander's voice saying, "As long as she's blind, they'll never stop giving me what I want." The networks ran it in loops. Pundits debated it. Social media split down the middle. Some called Alexander a monster. Others still believed him. And through it all, Reynolds watched from his penthouse, calm, composed, the architect of chaos. "Let the king fall on his own sword," he murmured. Back at the mansion, Alexander stormed through his study, slamming folders onto the desk. His lawyers scrambled to explain, but the damage was spreading faster than they could contain it. "They'll eat me alive," Alexander muttered, gripping his temples. "The board, the investors. Everything I built." Nia stepped forward, voice steady despite the storm. "Then fight back with the truth. Not just in court. In front of everyone. Show them Serafina. Show them what he did to her." The room went silent. Alexander's gaze lifted slowly, meeting hers. His eyes were red, weary, but burning with a new fire. "You're right," he said. "If Reynolds wants war in the open, then the world will see exactly who he is." That night, as Serafina drifted to sleep, Nia stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker below. The media storm had only just begun. But one thing was clear. Reynolds wasn't trying to defend himself. He was trying to destroy Alexander completely. And he was willing to burn down anyone who stood in his way. The cameras flashed like lightning, each burst brighter than the last. For 7 years, the world believed Serafina Anderson lived in darkness. Now, standing at her father's side in a crowded ballroom in downtown Los Angeles, she blinked against the light bulbs and leaned into him, small fingers wrapped tightly around his hand. The press fell silent. The sight alone was enough to fracture everything they thought they knew. Alexander Anderson stepped to the podium, his voice strong, unyielding. "You want proof?" he said, gesturing gently toward his daughter. "Here she is." Gasps rippled through the crowd as Serafina raised her chin, eyes glistening under the stage lights. 7 years ago, Alexander continued, a man I trusted told me she was blind. He forged records. He stole millions. And worst of all, he stole my daughter's chance to live free. He paused, emotion catching in his throat. But he failed. Because my daughter sees. She sees the world, and she sees me. And I will not let him take another second of her life. The applause thundered, but Serafina's small voice cut through the noise. She leaned toward the microphone, her words soft but clear. "Daddy always told me I was special. He never gave up on me. But the truth is, he didn't have to fight alone. Miss Nia helped me see. She gave us back our light." The room broke. Reporters wiped their eyes. Even hardened cameramen lowered their lenses for a moment, shaken. It was the kind of moment no smear campaign could erase, raw, undeniable, human. But in a penthouse across town, Dr. Reynolds watched the broadcast with a sneer curling across his lips. "Cute," he muttered, pouring another drink. "Parade the kid. Make the world cry. But tears don't last." He opened a briefcase on the table. Inside lay files, photos, and flash drives, evidence twisted so carefully it could topple Alexander's empire with a single leak. His phone buzzed. A message lit the screen. "They bought it. Next phase." Reynolds typed back 2 words. "Burn everything." The celebration didn't last 24 hours. By the next morning, fire engines screamed through Beverly Hills as thick black smoke rose against the California sky. Crowds gathered at the gates of the Anderson estate, cell phones raised, live streams running. Flames licked the side of a 3-car garage. Luxury vehicles, a Tesla, a Rolls, a Bentley, melted into skeletons of metal. The smell of burning oil choked the air. Alexander stood in the driveway, fists clenched, watching firefighters battle the blaze. He didn't need an investigation. He already knew. Reynolds. This wasn't an accident. It was a message. Hours later, investigators confirmed accelerants. Security footage showed 2 masked figures slipping through a side gate. But the real blow came when Alexander's attorneys arrived with grim faces. "Half the medical files you handed us," one said quietly. "They're gone. The storage facility burned last night. Total loss." Nia's heart dropped. "He's erasing evidence." Alexander's jaw locked, his face stone. "Not all of it. We still have Serafina. We still have you." But even as he spoke, the weight of the fire pressed down like a warning. Reynolds was tightening the noose. That evening, as Nia tucked Serafina into bed, she noticed a smear of ash on the little girl's teddy bear, the one Reynolds had stolen before. Her blood ran cold. He'd been inside again. Across town, in a darkened hotel suite, Reynolds sat in silence, files spread across the table. Flames reflected in the glass as news footage of the garage fire played on loop. "Let him scream innocence," he muttered. "Let him parade the child. But without proof, he's finished. And when the public turns on him, I'll own what's left." He lifted a flash drive between 2 fingers, smirking. Time to make the world believe Alexander Anderson is the real villain. By Monday morning, Alexander Anderson's empire was bleeding. The fire hadn't even cooled before the media storm reignited, only this time, the headlines were worse. Anderson fraud deepens, whistleblower leaks explosive documents. Billionaire used daughter's blindness for tax fraud. Doctor or victim? Reynolds speaks out. On live television, Dr. Martin Reynolds sat in a crisp gray suit, his voice calm, his manner rehearsed. "I never wanted this to go public," he told the anchor, shaking his head like a grieving friend. "But the truth is, Alexander Anderson asked me to lie. He exploited his daughter's condition to win sympathy from investors. I only went along because I feared losing my license, and my life." The anchor leaned in. "You're saying he is the mastermind?" Reynolds sighed heavily. "Yes. And now he's trying to pin it all on me." By noon, social media split in half. Some called Reynolds a liar. Others saw him as a whistleblower exposing billionaire corruption. At the Anderson estate, lawyers stormed in, waving newspapers and demanding damage control. Investors pulled out of deals. Stock prices dipped. Alexander slammed his fists onto the desk. "He's flipping the narrative. Making me the villain." Nia stepped forward. "Then show them the truth. Show them Serafina again. They need to see her, not as a headline, but as a little girl who was robbed." But Alexander hesitated. His world had always been built on numbers, deals, and control. And Reynolds had stolen the one thing he couldn't buy back, trust. That night, as Nia scrolled through her phone, she froze. A new video was trending. Edited clips spliced together, Alexander shouting at board meetings, Alexander slamming doors, Alexander speaking in fragments twisted into threats. The title screamed. Inside the monster, leaked footage shows Billionaire's rage. Her hands shook. The comments were brutal. No wonder he lied. Poor little girl. Used like a pawn. Reynolds was right. Up in his penthouse, Reynolds watched the video climb to 1 million views in under an hour. He swirled his glass of scotch, lips curling into a smile. "Let the world see the villain I made," he whispered. The call came just after midnight. Nia jolted awake in her small room at the far end of the mansion, heart racing as the ringtone cut through the silence. Unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered. "Miss Carter," the voice drawled, calm, cold, unmistakable. "Reynolds." Her throat tightened. "Leave this family alone." He chuckled softly. "You've been busy, haven't you? Playing hero. Playing nanny detective. Do you really think anyone will believe you over me?" "I have proof," she snapped. "And Alexander has more." "Proof burns," he said, his tone suddenly sharp. "And little maids disappear." The line went dead. If you're new, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. Someone close to you might be watching too. Only subscribers get the full story. Don't be left behind. The next morning, she found it. A small box left on the hood of her car in the staff parking lot. Inside, a single pair of broken glasses, their lenses cracked down the middle, and a note. "One accident away." Her hands shook as she clutched the note. Whoever had left it had gotten past the mansion's guards, past the gates, past everything. Reynolds wasn't just threatening anymore. He was inside. When she showed Alexander, his face turned to stone. "He's targeting you because you're the one thing he didn't expect," Alexander said, voice low. "You found the truth. You're his biggest risk." Nia swallowed hard. "And what happens if he decides to remove that risk?" For a moment, silence hung heavy between them. Then Alexander leaned forward, eyes burning with a resolve Nia had never seen before. "Then we don't wait for him to strike again," he said. "We take the fight to him." That night, as Nia tucked Serafina into bed, the little girl whispered, "Miss Nia, are you scared?" Nia forced a smile, brushing the child's hair back. "A little. But sometimes being brave means being scared and still standing up anyway." Serafina hugged her tight. Then you're the bravest person I know. Nia closed her eyes, heart aching. She wasn't sure how much longer she could carry that title. Because somewhere out in Los Angeles, Reynolds had just made his next move. And this time, he wasn't playing games. The night was too quiet. For a mansion with cameras on every wall and guards pacing the grounds, the silence felt unnatural, heavy. Nia felt it first, a chill crawling up her spine as she tucked Serafina into bed. "Miss Nia," the girl whispered sleepily, "why are the lights outside off?" Nia froze. The estate's floodlights, always blazing across the driveway and hedges, were dark. Her pulse slammed. Down in the study, Alexander was on a late-night call with his lawyers when the house alarm shrieked to life. Glass shattered somewhere near the east wing. Security scrambled. Guards sprinted across the property. But by the time they reached the breach, it was too late. A masked figure had already slipped inside. Nia grabbed Serafina, pulling her close. She could hear footsteps in the hallway, slow and deliberate. Whoever it was wasn't rushing. They knew exactly where they were going. Her breath hitched. She grabbed the flashlight she still kept in her pocket, the same one that had revealed Serafina's secret weeks ago. She clicked it on, gripping it like a weapon. The doorknob rattled. "Stay behind me," Nia whispered. The door creaked open. For one terrifying second, she thought it was a stranger. But when the figure stepped into the light, the mask slipped just enough for her to see him. Reynolds. His eyes locked on hers, cold, merciless. "You should have stayed in Ohio," he hissed. Before Nia could react, Alexander's voice bellowed from behind, raw with fury. "Get away from her." Chaos erupted. Security guards stormed the hallway. Reynolds lunged forward, shoving Nia against the wall before being tackled to the ground. Serafina screamed, clutching her bear. In the struggle, Reynolds shouted over the noise, his voice venomous. "You think this ends here, Anderson? You think money will save you? You don't know who you're up against." It took 4 guards to pin him, wrenching his arms behind his back as he kicked and spat like a cornered animal. Finally, they dragged him down the hall, his threats echoing through the mansion until the front doors slammed shut. Nia collapsed to the floor, trembling, Serafina wrapped tightly in her arms. The girl whispered, voice shaking, "Miss Nia, is it over?" Nia swallowed hard, forcing strength into her tone. "Almost, sweetheart. Almost." But deep down, she knew, Reynolds wasn't finished. Not until he was behind bars. The courtroom was packed, cameras lined the aisles, and America leaned in to watch the fall of a man who had once held a billionaire in chains. Dr. Martin Reynolds sat at the defense table, sharp suit, cold eyes, every movement calculated. He looked less like a criminal and more like a politician running for office. And that was the danger, he knew how to play an audience. At the opposite table, Alexander Anderson sat with Nia beside him, Serafina shielded from the cameras by a court-appointed advocate. Alexander's jaw was steel, his gaze locked forward. When the judge called the case, the prosecution wasted no time. "Ladies and gentlemen," the lawyer began, "this man stole more than money. He stole trust. He stole a child's chance at life. And he built his fortune on 7 years of lies." Reynolds' attorney rose, smooth and confident. "Mr. Anderson is no victim," he declared. "He is a billionaire used to control, used to power. He exploited his daughter's supposed blindness for sympathy, tax breaks, and public image. My client? He was a pawn in Anderson's scheme, nothing more." Gasps rippled. The jury leaned forward. The battle had begun. Piece by piece, the prosecution laid it out, forged medical records, falsified invoices, offshore accounts traced directly to Reynolds. Screens lit up with side-by-side comparisons, original hospital files versus Reynolds' fabrications. Then came Nia. She took the stand, hands trembling, but her voice steady. I saw her blink in the light. I found the ultrasound. I found the truth he buried. And when I confronted her, Serafina begged me not to tell. Because Dr. Reynolds told her that if her father knew, he'd stop loving her. The courtroom went still. Even hardened reporters glanced at each other, jaws tight. Alexander's eyes burned as he looked at Reynolds across the room. Reynolds finally rose to testify. His tone was silk, his smile rehearsed. Do you really believe a billionaire father, one of the sharpest men in Silicon Valley, could be fooled for 7 years? No. This was his plan. I only did what he demanded. For a moment, doubt stirred. Until the prosecution revealed the final piece, a flash drive Nia had recovered from the study. Inside were recordings Reynolds had made himself. Bragging about manipulating Alexander, mocking Serafina, laughing at the money he siphoned. The courtroom erupted. Reynolds' face drained of color. The judge slammed the gavel. Order. Order in the court. But the verdict was already written in every eye. The verdict came down just before noon. Guilty. On all counts, fraud, falsification of medical records, embezzlement, child endangerment. The gavel's crack echoed like thunder as Dr. Martin Reynolds slumped in his chair, his polished mask shattered. The world had watched him unravel. His empire of lies crumbled in a single word. Outside the courthouse, cameras swarmed as Alexander Anderson stepped onto the marble steps, his daughter's hand clasped tightly in his. Serafina shielded her eyes against the sunlight, real, dazzling sunlight, the kind she'd been denied for so long. Reporters shouted questions, microphones shoved forward, but Alexander didn't answer. He simply looked down at his little girl, tears brimming, and whispered, "This is your world now. No more shadows." Nia stood a few steps back, overwhelmed as flashbulbs flickered around her. She hadn't come here to change lives. But she had. She'd given them back their light. That evening, the Anderson estate felt different. For once, the air wasn't heavy with silence. The halls rang with laughter, real laughter. Serafina sat on the balcony, a sketchbook in her lap, her small hands moving clumsily with colored pencils. She turned the page toward Nia with pride. "It's not perfect," she said, giggling. Nia blinked back tears. The page was filled with uneven lines and bold, messy color, the ocean, the sky, the sun. "It's beautiful," Nia whispered. "Because it's yours." Alexander stepped onto the balcony, setting 2 mugs of cocoa on the table. For a moment, he simply stood there, watching them. "I built companies, Nia," he said quietly. "I built empires. But you built this. You gave me back my daughter. I can never repay that." Nia shook her head. "You don't need to. Just don't let her light be taken again." Alexander nodded slowly. "Never." As the sun dipped over Los Angeles, painting the horizon in fire and gold, Serafina leaned against her father, her voice soft as the wind. "Daddy, thank you for never giving up on me." He kissed the top of her head, eyes glistening. "No, baby girl," he whispered. "Thank Nia. She gave us back our light." And for the first time in 7 years, the mansion that once hid in shadows glowed with something money could never buy, freedom. If you're still not subscribing, drop a comment. What's holding you back?